The wind of the dying world blew like the breath of a forgotten god, and the red dust rose around the feet of the lone explorer as he walked across the empty plain. The sky was pale and sick with light that had lost its warmth long ago, and the sun was only a dim ember struggling against a curtain of ash. His name was Orion Vale, once a man of the stars now. Only a wanderer who had outlived his ship, his crew, and his purpose. He moved toward the horizon where the shape of something vast and broken rose from the desert floor. It was a ruin of metal half buried in the sand like the skeleton of a great beast. The fallen starship stretched for miles, its hull torn and scorched, its engines silent for centuries. He had found it by following the magnetic echoes that still pulsed faintly through the dust, a dying heartbeat of forgotten machinery. When he reached the first shadow of its hull, he stopped and looked up. The letters on the side were worn away by time, but he could still make out fragments of the name. It had once been called the Dawnbreaker, a vessel built for exploration and hope. Now it was only a tomb. Orion touched the cold metal with a gloved hand and closed his eyes. The memories came to him, unbidden faces, voices, laughter, the hum of the reactor, the steady voice of the captain who had believed they could reach the edge of the known galaxy. They had found this planet then called Acheron 9 and had dreamed of making it bloom with life. But the storms came, the ground cracked, the atmosphere turned to poison, and one by one they had fallen. He alone had walked away. He stepped through a breach in the hull where the metal had split open like a wound. Inside, the air was dry and heavy with dust. His boots crunched on debris-shattered consoles, bent rails, and pieces of memory turned to ash. Light from his wrist lamp cut through the darkness, revealing flickers of color. Where the paint still clung to the walls, he passed through corridors that had once sung with life and now only echoed with the sound of his breath. In the mess hall, tables were overturned trays scattered across the floor, a skeleton slumped against the wall, still wearing the insignia of the science division. He knelt and brushed the dust from the badge. The name was unreadable, but the gesture felt like a prayer. In the command center, he found the great viewing screen shattered and black. The captain's chair sat empty, facing what had once been the stars. He stood there for a long time. The silence was absolute. Then he spoke quietly. "I made it back." His voice startled him, for it had been days since he last heard it. Perhaps years. Time meant little here. The ship had crashed long before his memory stretched back. He had been young then, full of belief that humanity could heal any wound given enough time. Now he was the wound. He set down his pack and began to work. The beacon at the ship's heart still pulsed, faintly buried beneath layers of metal and dust. If he could reach it, maybe he could send a signal across the void. Maybe someone would hear. He began clearing debris, his hands steady and deliberate. Hours passed. He worked until his suit's filters clogged with dust and the light dimmed. When he paused to drink from his ration tube, he looked up through a hole in the ceiling and saw the stars emerging faintly through the haze. There were fewer now than he remembered, as if the universe itself were dimming with age. Night on Acheron 9 was colder than death. He built a small fire from carbon fragments and sat near it, listening to the wind howl through the torn corridors. His mind wandered through the years he had lost. The crash, the long nights of survival, the endless storms. He remembered the faces of those who had not made it, and the promise he had made to himself to carry their memory forward. But memory was heavy and hope was thin. As the fire crackled, a sound reached him, faint but distinct. A voice. He froze. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks, but then it came again clearer. A woman's voice calling through static. "This is Lieutenant Mara Ellis of the Dawnbreaker. If anyone can hear this, please respond." Orion's heart thudded painfully. It could not be real. Mara Ellis had died decades ago. He had seen her buried beneath the sands himself. Yet the voice was unmistakable. He grabbed his communicator and tuned the frequency. "This is Orion Vale," he said, his voice trembling. "Mara, if that is you, answer me." Silence. Then the voice again, though weaker this time. "Orion, follow the light." The signal broke into static and vanished. He stood motionless for a long time, then turned off the communicator and looked toward the ship's core. The beacon. The light. Maybe that was what she meant. Maybe her voice was a ghost stored in the ship's systems, a fragment of data echoing across time. Or maybe it was something else, something the dying world itself had remembered. He packed his things and began to move deeper into the wreck. The corridors grew narrower and darker. The air tasted metallic through his filters. He passed through chambers filled with frost where the coolant. Systems had ruptured long ago, forming icy sculptures that glittered. In his lamp's glow, the deeper he went, the stronger the pulse became, a rhythmic flicker of blue light through the dust. He followed it down a twisted stairway into the heart of the ship. At last he reached the core chamber. The great reactor stood silent, its once roaring power now nothing but a whisper. But the emergency beacon still glowed weakly in the center of the room, like a single star trapped in a cage of rusted metal. He approached and knelt beside it. The console was cracked, the interface dead. Yet when he touched the surface, it flickered to life, and a holographic image appeared before him. It was Mara. Her form shimmered translucent, but her eyes were clear and filled with the same calm strength he remembered. "Orion Vale," she said gently. "If you are seeing this, it means you survived. It also means I did not. But there is still hope for this world." He reached out as if to touch her, but his hand passed through the light. "The core still carries the genetic archives," she continued. "Seeds, data, blueprints for life itself. If you can restore power, the planet may heal. That was our mission, remember? To bring life where none remained. If you are alone, you must finish it." Then her image flickered, and the message looped again, repeating the same words. He sat there in silence, staring at her until the light dimmed. Finally, he stood and began his work. He scavenged power cells from the auxiliary. Systems patched together cables from the walls, rerouted circuits, and slowly fed energy back into the beacon. The hum returned, weak but steady. The blue light brightened. He could feel warmth on his face for the first time in years. When the system stabilized, he activated the archive. Lines of code filled the air, projections of DNA sequences, planetary scans, and mission logs. The ship's memory had survived. So had their dream. He laughed softly, and then he wept, though no tears could fall inside his helmet. Hours turned to days as he worked, restoring what he could. He repaired broken conduits and cleared vents to release pressure. He built small energy collectors outside the wreck to draw what little sunlight remained. Slowly, the Dawnbreaker began to breathe again. Then the ground trembled. At first, he thought it was the shifting of the sand, but then the vibration grew stronger. He ran to the nearest viewport and saw the horizon rippling as if the planet itself were waking. A storm unlike any he had seen was rising, black and gold and filled with lightning. He grabbed his pack and sealed the chamber. The beacon was stable, but if the storm reached this area, it could bury everything again. He had to protect it. The wind hit with the force of a living thing, tearing at his suit and pushing him back toward the wreck. He fought his way up through the corridors as the structure groaned around him. Metal screamed, dust filled the air, and pieces of ceiling crashed down in showers of sparks. When he reached the breach in the hull, he looked out across the storm. The sky boiled with fire. For a moment he saw something move within it, something vast and winged, like a creature made of lightning. Then it was gone, swallowed by the clouds. He turned back into the ship and sealed the entrance. The lights flickered but held. He sank against the wall, exhausted. The storm raged for hours, maybe days. He could not tell. When it finally passed, he stepped outside again. The world had changed. The air was still harsh, but he could see faint streaks of green along the ridges, tiny shoots of life clinging to the sand. He stared in wonder. The archives had worked. The Dawnbreaker's last mission had begun to take root, yet he was not alone. Footprints led away from the wreck, fresh and human. He raised his rifle and followed them into the wind. The footprints wound across the sand like a trail left by a ghost. Orion followed them carefully, keeping his rifle ready, though his heart beat with something closer to hope than fear. The world around him shimmered under the pale light of the dying sun, and the air was heavy with a strange scent like rain and metal. He had not smelled rain in years. The tracks led toward a ridge of black stone that jutted from the desert like the spine of some ancient creature. As he climbed the slope, he saw movement near the top, a figure standing against the wind. For a moment, he thought it might be a hallucination born of exhaustion, but then the figure turned. It was a woman. Her suit was scorched and patched with scraps of alien metal, her helmet half shattered, revealing a face pale with starlight and eyes that glowed faintly blue. She looked at him and spoke a name he had not heard in a lifetime. Orion. He froze, unable to speak. She stepped, closer, moving with the hesitant grace of someone who had forgotten what it meant to stand on living ground. "You heard my call?" she said softly. "You came back, Mara," he whispered. "You are not real, you died." "I buried you myself," she smiled faintly. "You buried the body, yes, but not me. The ship kept a fragment of my mind. The storms preserved it. When you reactivated the core, I awoke." He stared at her. "You are an echo." "Maybe. Or maybe I am what remains when the body is gone and duty endures." "Does it matter?" He lowered his rifle slowly. The wind tugged at his cloak and scattered sand around their feet. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she pointed toward the horizon, where faint lines of green shimmered like veins across the red plain. "The world is changing," she said. "The archives are working. Life is returning, but it will not last unless we finish what we began." He nodded. "The beacon is stable, but the reactors are failing. I can buy us time if I can reach the fusion core in the lower deck. It is buried deep. I will need help." "Then you have it." They walked back together in silence through the ruins of the Dawnbreaker. Inside the corridors, the lights flickered faintly, a sign that the ship's systems were waking once more. Mara moved as though guided by memory, knowing which paths were safe, which doors still opened, which panels hid power lines. He realized that she was part of the ship now, her consciousness intertwined with its circuits. At the reactor chamber, the heat was unbearable. The main coolant pumps had long since failed and the air shimmered with energy. Orion adjusted his suit's filters and approached the control console. "If I reroute the secondary lines, we might restart the coolant flow," he said. "It will not hold forever, but it could stabilize the core long enough to seed the biosphere." Mara nodded. "Do it. I will handle the internal systems." He set to work. His hands moved quickly, though his body was weak from hunger and time. Sparks burst from broken panels as he connected new power lines and replaced burnt circuits. The hum of energy grew stronger. Then Mara gasped. "What is it?" he asked. "There is movement beneath us," she said. "Something old, something waking." Before he could respond, the floor trembled and a deep sound filled the air like the growl of a machine long buried. Metal groaned and split open as part of the deck collapsed, revealing a dark chasm below. From the shadows came a shape massive and mechanical, its eyes glowing red. It was one of the ship's automated sentinels, a guardian drone built to protect the core from intruders. Its systems must have reactivated when power returned. Orion raised his rifle and fired. The energy bolt struck the drone's armor and flared harmlessly. The machine turned toward him and advanced, crushing metal beneath its claws. "Mara, shut it down!" he shouted. "I am trying," she said, her voice tight with strain. "It is rejecting my commands. Its memory is corrupted." The drone swung an arm, and a beam of light sliced through the air, scorching the wall beside Orion. He rolled aside and fired again, aiming for the exposed joints. One shot struck true, and the machine staggered but did not fall. "Orion, you must reach the manual override," Mara said. "It is in the lower conduit. Hurry!" He ran toward the far end of the chamber, diving through smoke and sparks. The air burned in his lungs, and the roar of the drone filled his ears. He reached the console, pulled the lever, and slammed his palm onto the emergency control pad. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the drone froze, its red eyes dimming. It collapsed with a thunderous crash that shook the chamber. Orion leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Mara appeared beside him, her form flickering with static. "You did it," she said. "Not alone," he replied. They returned to the console. The reading stabilized. The coolant flow resumed, and the reactor's pulse slowed to a steady rhythm. The ship's systems hummed in quiet harmony. Outside, the storm clouds thinned, revealing a faint dawn. Days passed. Together, they repaired what they could, restoring life support modules and energy collectors. The ship became a sanctuary once more, though it was only the shadow of what it had been. Orion began to notice changes in the land beyond. The green veins spread across the sand, forming patches of moss and fragile stems. Strange, luminous spores drifted through the air, glowing softly at night like stars fallen to earth. Sometimes he walked among them and felt warmth beneath his boots. The planet was healing, yet each day Mara's presence grew weaker. Her image flickered more often, and her voice broke with static. "You are fading," he said one evening as they watched the horizon. "I am part of the ship," she answered. "As it rebuilds, I will become the seed of its memory. But my human echo cannot last." He turned to her. "There must be a way to preserve you." "There is," she said quietly. "The genetic archives include human templates. If I merge my data with them and use one of the pods in the cryo chamber, I could awaken again, not as I was, but reborn." He stared at her. "That could destroy you, or save me. The planet needs caretakers, Orion. You cannot do it alone, and you will not live forever." He looked away. The thought of losing her again tore through him like a blade, yet he knew she was right. Together they went to the cryo deck. Most of the pods were shattered, but one remained intact, filled with nutrient gel and faint blue light. Mara interfaced with the control system, her form dissolving into streams of data that flowed into the pod. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Yes, do not grieve, Orion. This is not an end." He activated the sequence. The pod filled with light so bright he had to shield his eyes. When it faded, the chamber was silent. The holographic image was gone. Only the hum of the pod remained steady and sure. He waited. Hours passed. Then the pod opened. A figure emerged, covered in fluid, breathing shakily. It was her. Flesh and blood, though faintly different. Her skin bore a faint silver hue, and her eyes glowed softly like the planet's dawn. She looked at him and smiled weakly. It worked. He helped her stand. "Welcome back." They spent the following weeks rebuilding what remained of their world. Together they planted the first seeds from the archives and tended them with care. The atmosphere grew clearer, the storms weaker. The air became breathable again, and Orion removed his helmet for the first time in decades. He breathed deeply and felt the sting of life rush into his lungs. Mara laughed beside him. "The world breathes again." He looked at her and felt something awaken in him too, something long buried beneath years of silence. As months turned to years, they built a home near the shadow of the Dawnbreaker. Vines crept along its hull and flowers bloomed where once there had been only ash. Strange creatures emerged from the forests that grew, from their hands their eyes reflecting. The twin lights of sun and moon, they named the world Elysia after the dream they had once shared. In time, their story became legend whispered by the winds and carried across the stars by the signal Orion restored. The beacon shone bright now, not as a cry for help, but as a message of rebirth, and when the end finally came for him, he lay beneath the shade of the trees they had planted and looked toward the ship. That had once been his tomb and now was their cradle. Mara sat beside him holding his hand. Her eyes were still bright, filled with the same fire that had guided him through every storm. "You kept your promise," she said. "So did you," he whispered. "You brought life back to the dead." The light of the setting sun painted the sky in gold and crimson. He smiled one last time and closed his eyes. She remained there long after the stars returned, watching over the world they had created, and far above, in the endless night, the beacon of the Dawnbreaker still shone, calling out across the galaxies to any who would listen that even on a dying world, hope can rise again.